It began with a sound, the sharp, brittle crack of chalk snapping against a whiteboard. Professor Raymond Holt turned to face his class, his designer wristwatch catching the light, his smile polished and cruel. He loved this part, the performance of genius, the authority that came with knowing no one dared question him. But that morning, someone did. Alicia Carter. She sat halfway down the lecture hall, notebook open, her eyes locked on the dense formula sprawled across the board. She wasn't trying to challenge him, only to understand. But Holt didn't like questions from people who didn't look like they belonged in his world. He called her name, slow and mocking, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Miss Carter," he said, "since you believe my equation is wrong, why don't you come enlighten the rest of us?" A low murmur rippled through the class. Everyone knew what was coming. Professor Holt's invitations weren't really invitations, they were traps. Alicia stood, clutching her notes. Her voice was steady, respectful. She said she only wanted to know why the chaos term couldn't stabilize if the boundary conditions were altered. The professor's smirk widened. "Ah, altered," he repeated, as though tasting something bitter. Then he looked at the class. "You see, everyone? This is what happens when curiosity gets ahead of comprehension. It's like a child playing with fire." The students laughed, some genuinely, others nervously. Alicia froze, her heart pounding. But she refused to look away. She answered softly, "Maybe the fire's only dangerous when someone pretends to understand it." The laughter stopped. The words landed like a slap. Holt's smirk twitched, not gone, but wounded. He turned back to the board, circling his formula as if reclaiming territory. His tone turned sharp. "This, class, is a model unsolvable under real number constraints. But apparently, Miss Carter believes she can fix what no one else can." A few students exchanged glances. One whispered, "She's done for." Holt turned again, that smug, performative smile plastered back in place. "Go ahead, Miss Carter. Show us. Or perhaps your confidence ends where the math begins." The room fell silent. Alicia's hands trembled, but not from fear. She met his eyes and said evenly, "Maybe I can't solve your version of it. But maybe that's because you've never solved it either." The entire hall went still. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to fade. Holt's jaw tightened. "Sit down," he hissed. "You're embarrassing yourself." Alicia gathered her notes slowly, her voice low but clear. "No, Professor. You already did that for me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Holt barked, "Class dismissed." He turned his back before anyone could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. When the students began to leave, Alicia walked out first. She didn't rush. Her steps were measured, steady. Behind her, whispers followed like shadows. That was the moment everyone thought she'd lost. But humiliation is a powerful fuel, and Alicia Carter had just been set on fire. That night, the campus library became her battleground. Rows of books towered over her like silent witnesses as the glow of her laptop lit her tired eyes. She replayed every word of that confrontation. The laughter, the smug grin, the way Holt said her name like it didn't belong in his classroom. She wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. She searched through his published research, every paper, every formula, every reference he'd ever cited. And somewhere between the footnotes and the equations, she found it. A pattern that didn't add up. His unsolvable formula wasn't unsolvable at all. It was tampered with. A single coefficient had been altered, intentionally, to make the equation collapse before it reached its true conclusion. He hadn't solved it because he didn't want anyone to. Alicia leaned back, staring at the screen. The anger that once made her voice tremble now turned to a calm, calculating fire. "You didn't fail to solve it," she whispered to herself. "You made sure no one else could." And for the first time that day, she smiled. 2 mornings later, Holt returned to the same lecture hall, full of confidence and caffeine. He launched into his lecture, waving the marker like a conductor's baton. The students laughed again, relaxed, back under his control. Then Alicia stood up. Every head turned. "Sir," she said firmly, "your chaos model breaks because of a single boundary condition. If you normalize it, the chaos stabilizes." The professor blinked. Excuse me? She walked down the aisle, calm as stone, and took a marker
I
from
don't
his desk.
understand.
On the
This equation
whiteboard,
is
she rewrote
unsolvable.
his own equation,
It is
this
solvable.
time
You
correctly.
just have to look at
In
it
less
from a
than a
different
minute,
angle.
the impossible resolved into balance. The room fell into stunned silence. Professor Holt stared at the board, his jaw tightening. His breath came faster. For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. That's not, he stammered. That's coincidence. Alicia turned toward him. Her tone was calm, almost kind. No, Professor. That's the truth you've been hiding. Murmurs filled the room. Phones appeared. Students whispered. Everyone could see it, the flaw in his masterwork. And Holt could feel his empire cracking. Sit down, he snapped, slamming the marker onto the desk. You've corrupted the data. Then prove it, she replied. He couldn't. That night, Alicia uploaded her notes to the university's internal research forum, a short paper draft titled Predictive Modeling in Nonlinear Chaos Systems. It was clean, methodical, and brilliant. It credited no one but her. When Holt's assistant Megan saw it, she froze. She knew what it meant. Alicia had not only solved the formula, she'd exposed a fraud. Meanwhile, in his office, Holt sat staring at the same paper on his screen. His eyes traced her name again and again. Alicia Carter. His hand clenched into a fist. You want a war? He muttered. You'll get one. He shut his laptop hard enough to rattle the desk. He had mocked her for daring to question him. Now she questioned the very foundation of his fame. In a world built on ego and equations, Raymond Holt had just discovered a problem he couldn't control. A student with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The battle between them had only begun. The morning after Alicia's public victory, the air on campus felt different. Whispers followed her wherever she went, not cruel ones this time, but curious, reverent, amazed. The girl who'd stood up to Professor Holt had done the impossible. She'd solved the unsolvable. But for Holt, that same morning was soaked in humiliation. The department chair had already called, asking questions he didn't want to answer. Emails flooded in from colleagues across the country, some congratulating him, others asking if the rumors were true. Rumors that his student had outsmarted him. He stared at his screen, a single phrase haunting him from one of the emails. Perhaps it's time to give credit where it's due, Raymond. His jaw tightened until it ached. Credit? To her? Never. That afternoon, he called his assistant, Megan, into his office. She stepped in quietly, holding a stack of printed emails. Sir, there's a lot of attention around Alicia's paper, she said softly. Even the dean wants to talk about it. Holt leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. Then we'll make sure her paper doesn't exist. That night, as rain whispered against the office windows, Holt accessed the university's research archive. His fingers moved quickly, precise and deliberate. A few keystrokes, a few altered timestamps, Alicia's draft was gone. In its place, a new file appeared. Same equations. Same structure. But now, the name on it read, Professor Raymond Holt. Alicia Carter's name vanished into the dark corners of the digital system. The next morning, she tried to log in. Her account wouldn't load. Her files were missing. She stared at the empty folder on her laptop, heart pounding. At first, she thought it was a glitch. But then she saw the university's website, Holt's name plastered under the headline. Professor Raymond Holt makes breakthrough in predictive chaos theory. Her stomach twisted. The same formula. The same words. Her work. She whispered, he stole it. And for the first time, she felt fear. But fear didn't last long in Alicia Carter. It hardened into resolve. She walked across campus, through the cold October wind, straight into Holt's office. The secretary tried to stop her. She didn't listen. When she entered, Holt was signing papers. He didn't even look up. I see you've been reading the news, he said calmly. Alicia's voice was steady. You stole my work. Finally, he looked up. That smirk again. The one that had started everything. Correction, he said. You contributed to my research. You used my model, my system, my resources. The university owns your data. It's not theft, it's structure. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. You know I solved it. "I know," he said, leaning forward, "and I know you'll never prove it." Then, in a quieter tone, "You should have stayed quiet, Miss Carter. The world doesn't like noisy prodigies." Alicia turned and left without another word. But inside, something shifted. She wasn't scared anymore. She was angry, cold, focused, dangerous. That night, she met her friend Kia at a small diner off campus. Rain pattered against the windows as she explained everything: the deletion, the stolen credit, the manipulation. Kia stared in disbelief. "He can't do that. You've got evidence, right?" Alicia nodded slowly. "Not yet. But I will." She pulled out a flash drive, the same one she used to back up her work. "He didn't know I kept copies." Over the next week, Alicia began to dig deeper. Every night, she sat in the quiet glow of her dorm room, piecing together digital footprints, old log files, access timestamps, traces of Holt's login credentials. What she found was worse than theft. He hadn't just stolen her work, he'd modified it to make her look incompetent. One of the copied drafts had been altered, with deliberate mathematical errors inserted in her name. If the department reviewed it, they'd think she fabricated her results. Holt wasn't just taking credit. He was burying her. But Alicia Carter wasn't the type to die quietly in someone else's story. She gathered every piece of data she had and began building something new, something Holt couldn't touch. A system that could prove her authorship beyond manipulation. By mid-November, the university was buzzing with talk of Holt's breakthrough. He was invited to present his findings at the National Science Forum, a televised academic event. The perfect stage for a man who loved the sound of his own brilliance. When Alicia heard, she didn't get angry. She smiled. Because now, she knew exactly where to strike. 4 days, she worked quietly, coding a presentation of her own. A clean visual model of the real formula, her version, showing every correction, every timestamp, every hidden variable Holt had falsified. And more importantly, it would reveal the original metadata, her name, her timestamps, her proof. She only needed one opportunity to show it. That opportunity came the night before the conference. The university hosted a small reception dinner, an invitation-only gathering for faculty, donors, and top students. Alicia wasn't invited. She showed up anyway. Dressed in quiet confidence, she stepped through the glass doors like she belonged there, because in truth, she did. Holt was across the room, shaking hands with board members, basking in the glow of stolen admiration. When his eyes caught hers, the smile faltered for just a moment. Then he leaned toward the dean. "Security," he whispered. "Remove her." But before anyone could move, Alicia spoke, calm, measured, voice carrying through the crowd. "Professor Holt," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for proving one of my theories." Every head turned. Cameras clicked. He froze. "Your what?" "My theory," she said, holding up her tablet. "The one you'll be presenting tomorrow. I believe it's time the world saw the full version." And with one tap, the screen lit up, projecting her data onto the reception hall's digital display. Equations filled the air, complex, brilliant, undeniable. Then came the final slide, the file's metadata, flashing under her name. Author, Alicia Carter. Date created, September 28th. Modified by Raymond Holt. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Holt's face went pale. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "She hacked." But the dean was already moving closer. "Professor Holt, is this true?" He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Alicia didn't wait for him to. She simply turned, her voice calm and final. "You said the world doesn't like noisy prodigies, Professor. Maybe it's time they started listening." Then she walked out, leaving silence in her wake. In that moment, the lines between humiliation and justice blurred. The man who'd mocked her was now the subject of whispers, the same whispers that once followed her down those halls. But this time, she wasn't walking away in shame. She was walking toward something bigger, truth. And for Raymond Holt, the real reckoning hadn't even begun. Morning after the confrontation, the world woke up to chaos, the kind that even Professor Holt couldn't predict. Emails flooded the university's inbox. Journalists called. Social media exploded. Clips of Alicia's public exposure were everywhere, reposted, analyzed, dissected. Student outsmarts renowned professor. Academic fraud exposed. The real genius behind the formula. The story spread faster than Holt could breathe. For years, he had built his reputation on the illusion of genius. But now, that illusion was bleeding under the spotlight. In his office, Holt sat motionless. His awards, once gleaming trophies of pride, now looked like silent accusations. His phone buzzed endlessly, reporters, colleagues, even his own students demanding answers. At first, he tried to fight it. He wrote emails, crafted statements, blamed data corruption, academic misunderstanding. But the university's IT department had already verified the evidence. The metadata was real. The timestamps were real. The theft was undeniable. Then came the final blow, the dean's letter, crisp and merciless. He was placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. For the first time in his career, Professor Raymond Holt had nothing to say. Across campus, Alicia watched the headlines unfold from a quiet corner of the library, the same spot where her revenge had begun. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply exhaled, long and slow, like someone finally laying down a weight they'd carried too long. Her phone buzzed, another message from Kia. "Girl, you broke the internet." Alicia typed back. "No. I just told the truth." But the story didn't stop there. The National Science Forum, the same event Holt was supposed to headline, reached out to her. They wanted her to present the real formula. Not as a student, but as the rightful author. When she arrived, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras, reporters, curious faces, all waiting to see the girl who'd brought a professor to his knees with nothing but intellect and integrity. She walked onto the stage in a simple black suit, her hair tied back, her posture calm and sure. The crowd quieted as she began to speak, not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. She told them about the formula, about the missing constant that changed everything, about truth buried under ego, and finally, about how knowledge means nothing without honesty. Then she showed the equation one last time, the correct version, glowing across the screen like poetry. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Not the kind that comes from excitement, the kind that comes from respect. For a moment, she stood still, letting the sound wash over her. That applause wasn't revenge. It was recognition. While the world celebrated her brilliance, Holt sat alone in the very lecture hall where it all began. The same seats, the same board, the same silence. He replayed that day in his mind, her voice, her defiance, her intelligence. He tried to destroy her. Instead, she turned his arrogance into her proof. It was almost poetic, the man of equations undone by the one variable he never accounted for. Weeks later, Alicia was invited to join a new research program, fully funded, independent, and named after the same formula Holt once called Unsolvable. Now, it carried her name, the Carter equation. When the announcement went public, people called it poetic justice. But for Alicia, it was something simpler, closure. She didn't need to see Holt again. She didn't need an apology. The truth was enough. She returned one last time to that lecture hall, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude to herself. The board was clean now, wiped of the arrogant scribbles that once filled it. She picked up a marker, drew a single line through the air, and whispered, "Solved." Then she walked away. They say revenge is best served cold. But Alicia Carter didn't serve it cold. She served it brilliant. No shouting. No violence. No chaos. Just proof, undeniable, elegant, and public. Professor Holt mocked her for daring to question him. And in the end, it was her question that ended him. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from power or position. Sometimes, it comes from a mind too sharp to silence. And a woman too strong to stay quiet. And that was how the unsolvable was finally solved. If you enjoyed this story of poetic justice and intellectual revenge, hit that like button, because sometimes, the smartest comeback isn't loud, it's legendary. Subscribe for more stories where truth always finds its voice.